Welcome back to another episode of The Damage Report with me, John Arola. It's a big old Tuesday, not only in terms of the news, of which we've got way too much, but also elections. And we're probably gonna talk a little bit about that during the show today. But first, welcome to the show. Joining us once again, Jessica Burbank, how's it going?
Hello, I'm in my duplicate TDR set.
Exactly. No, it's sort of a mishmash. I believe that you've painstakingly recreated like there was a transporter accident between the TDR set and JR's set, and that's in her living room, which I think that's a devotion to the job that few can match. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I was working on this all night, John.
Exactly. It only took a night. Wow, you're crafty. Anyway, very glad to have you here. We're gonna be covering quite a bit of news today, and so I want to thank everyone out there in the audience for being here as well. Well, we're not going to be talking about one thing, and look, I'm gonna keep it real. This is more than likely an indictment of me and my never-ending willingness to allow my own personal interests or picadillos determine what's on the show. But I don't care about the Nancy Pelosi thing. Am I a bad guy? Jessica, what do you think?
No, I think many people are very sick of Nancy Pelosi right now.
I mean, look, I'm generally sick of her, but I mean specifically about her traveling to Taiwan. I know it's a historic, blah blah, 2.5 decades, highest ranking, blah blah. They say that they're really. I am assuming that China is not now launching nukes. You know, we're in LA, so you will be the first to let you know if the nukes hit. I think it's gonna be a nothing burger. I just don't care. I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you're right. I think people like making a big deal about a lot of the stuff that's going on when it ends up not being a very big deal, right?
Yeah. And look, I can be wrong. And by the way, if you're watching this right now and you are super invested in it, look, I'm not saying that the situation with Taiwan and China isn't important, of course, or even the US's role with those. Like, I'm not saying that at all. I don't want to pay attention to Nancy Pelosi today. Not today, okay? But there are a lot of things that we're gonna be paying attention to. So everyone, if you could hit the like button and share the stream, that'll help us out algorithmically and all that. If you wanna send us any comments, tweets, super chats, or anything along those lines, Jessica and I will respond as we go. But with all that said, are you ready to start the show?
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's do it. Let's start with this video, in fact.
My fellow Americans, on Saturday, at my direction, the United States successfully concluded an airstrike in Kabul, Afghanistan, that killed the emir of Al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri. He was deeply involved in the planning of 9/11, one of the most responsible for the attacks that murdered 2,977 people on American soil.
So Ayman al-Zawahiri is not a name that I think many Americans would necessarily be able to cite. But then again, we're not a people that's really that tapped into politics. Most can't name that many Supreme Court justices. But that doesn't mean that he's not an important figure, either currently as the de facto leader of Al-Qaeda, or historically helping to found the organization and being as involved as one can be in a number of important terror attacks. As of just the last few days, though, no more. And we're gonna give President Biden a chance to give us a little bit more details about why he believes this is such a significant action the US has taken.
For decades, he was the mastermind behind attacks against Americans, including the bombing of the USS Cole in 2000, which killed 17 American sailors and wounded dozens more. He played a key role in the bombing of US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, killing 224 and wounding over 4,500 others. He carved a trail of murder and violence against American citizens, American service members, American diplomats, and American interests.
That is true. Look, even if we only limit our analysis to the attacks that we know that al-Zawahiri was involved in the planning and execution of, the death toll is in the thousands, and God only knows how many other lives directly or indirectly can be laid at his feet. Not only in planning the attacks, but helping to organize, sustain, and coordinate offshoots of the organization in many different countries. And so for that, it's a victory that the Biden administration is going to be very enthusiastic about. We're gonna talk a little bit about the process of this, because I have my concerns there. But Jessica, I want to give you a chance to chime in. How big a news do you think this is? How proud should President Biden be?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty big news. I mean, this is not anything groundbreaking, but Stephen Kinzer and folks like Stephen Kinzer have been talking about what happens when CIA power goes unchecked for so long. And unfortunately, the CIA arming the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, it led to the ascent of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, many of whom were members of the Mujahideen. And even when we look at al-Zawahiri, we can directly link someone who was trained by the CIA ended up being the person who trained him. And so we could very simply say, this is a thing that happened. And that would be very convenient, for the Biden administration, who wants this to seem like, we are the good guys and we got this bad guys. But the context of history suggests it's a little more complicated than that. And that's important to bring up right now as well.
Yeah, and the most important part of that context, I think, is that the CIA lending monetary support and support in terms of equipment, the Stinger missiles and all of that to this group went wrong in this case. And that is a historic fluke. It will never happen again, so we don't need to worry about it. It's totally cool to do it again. But anyway, look, Biden was involved, obviously, in the mission that got bin Laden. He wasn't on the ground or anything, but he was in the room. And now, a good number of years later, the second in command, the two men most individually responsible for Al-Qaeda's origin and operations, now having been taken out, that is going to be significant for the future of Al-Qaeda. It's not the end of it. There's always someone who can step into that spot, can sit on the throne. They won't necessarily be as capable. They won't necessarily have, sort of the aura, the mythos that some of these figures have, having been there since the very beginning, since back in like at least the early 80s, if not earlier than that. And so it does seem significant. But let's talk a little bit about how they got this done. So the house that he was staying at was apparently owned by a top aide to a senior Taliban leader. Okay, so that's great going forward when, of course, the Taliban said that they weren't going to allow Afghanistan to become a haven for terrorists once again. I guess it was just the aide's house, not the actual leader's house. So awesome. The official added that there was a CIA ground team, an aerial reconnaissance conducted after the strike that confirmed the death of al-Zawahiri. Now, of course, they always say that. They are assuring us that the evidence is robust in this case, that they actually have video evidence that indicates that he did in fact die. Here's the thing though, earlier this year, they learned that his wife, daughter, and her children had relocated to a safe house in Kabul, okay? Eventually, he joined them. Now, they say that his family was in another part of the house when the operation was carried out, and no one else was believed to have been killed in the operation. And that is what they're saying. That's the words that they're saying. It just seems a little bit unlikely. Am I the bad guy? Am I a crazy person? Maybe it is true. And maybe they were able to, with, in their words, no boots on the ground when it happened, purely remotely, they were able to strike the house and kill him and just him, and that's it. Fingers crossed, I really hope so, because the idea of America adding even more non-combatants to the endless list from our drone strikes and operations in the past is reprehensible, but I find it a little bit hard to believe. Jessica, what do you think?
Yeah, John, crazy of you to think that US drone strikes could hurt civilians and not precisely only the target they're trying to hit. I don't think so. I don't think that would ever happen, John. That's absurd. I think it's totally reasonable. Yeah, it's reasonable to question how this all went down. It's reasonable to question the timing of all of this, always. Because I don't think the US government takes any action foreign policy wise without considering the context and the impact this will have on the foreign policy landscape, on people back at home. There's always this idea that we're gonna go fight our bad guys and enemies abroad when we need to rally up the base back home, right? There's all of these political intentions. It's never purely this is a bad guy and we've got to get him. And this is someone who's was number 2 to Osama bin Laden and ended up rising to the leadership of Al-Qaeda. He's also the same guy who attempted to assassinate Hosni Mubarak in Egypt. And that's really where he got his start, right? This is someone who has a history fighting for Islamic states or Islamist states. And so while we can point to the CIA history and the CIA's role in helping train him, we can also recognize that maybe this was not a good actor. But the more the United States intervenes abroad and kills leaders of terrorist groups abroad, the more I get worried that we're going to face even more retaliation for the interventions we've already done that have caused extreme blowback.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. I mean, we could reiterate the last couple of decades of conversation about exactly why the attacks are launched in the first place, and the right will assure us that it's a purely ideological jealousy sort of thing. But we know that's not how it works. I mean, all you have to do is literally listen to the things that the leaders of these organizations say for years and years and years. Maybe this time there will be no retaliation. Fingers crossed on that. Now I'm gonna skip ahead to graphic 5 and tell you the Taliban put out a statement saying it is an act against the interests of Afghanistan and the region. Repeating such actions will damage the available opportunities, which is a weird way to say that. I assume opportunities for collaboration in this area. I don't know. I mean, a member of the regime was apparently hiding this guy, so I'm not sure that those opportunities are as robust as they're being implied to be by the Taliban right now. But Biden has tried to assure the country during the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which we covered every day, and everybody knows that it was devastating in a lot of ways. Many people died during that time, not only from the bombing that killed US service members, but many civilians died as well trying to flee at that point. They said that they would still be able to conduct operations where needed. This seems to be evidence of that. I don't know how representative it is of their ability to do similar things in the future. I'm not even sure how in the interests of the United States people that would be. But I do know one thing, they do want some credit. And so to that end, they attempted to, in my view, recreate the big photo that you could probably picture of Obama and Biden and Hillary Clinton when they got Osama bin Laden. So in this case, they have this photo. It's not as powerful. No, I guess maybe they didn't have the photographer at the right point, but they're trying to get across the same thing, that although Biden he's lost several steps. I mean, we even had to chop up that video a little bit to cut out some of the parts where he had a really difficult time expressing his thoughts. He can still preside over these sorts of things. So I guess that's from his point of view to his credit, I guess. I don't know. Any thoughts about this before we move on?
The most interesting layer to this story is one that I completely forgot about until just now, and it's that there's a bill on the floor of the House right now that would essentially ban the US government from giving military aid to Afghanistan or humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, which is worth noting because we have progressives that are actively speaking out against this bill, saying we cannot bar ourselves from giving humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. But if we look at the history of CIA and US intervention and covert operations, oftentimes we intervene in other countries abroad and influence elections toward US policy interests through humanitarian aid. It becomes this vessel for us to assert our influence on that country. And so I think actually barring humanitarian aid in any intervention in Afghanistan is a good thing. And there are a few key progressives like Ilhan Omar who have come out against this and said we actually might need to aid Afghanistan. But there's a caution around that I think is worth mentioning.
Yeah, look, and my guess would be that if you were to sit down and talk with them, I'm sure many would acknowledge that. Like it's incredibly distasteful, the idea that after all that we did to that country over literally decades, that would be like, sorry, can't help you. But then you're totally right to acknowledge that. Would the help even be help? And to what degree? Where you can send the money in, sure. What happens with the money? I mean, it's incredibly difficult for a lot of NGOs to even operate on the ground there right now. So yeah, that's definitely something that would have to be very carefully managed. And it's it's one of the many issues. It's not super cut and dried.
Tonight, Biden gave a speech boasting that he's killed an Al-Qaeda figure in Afghanistan. Great. Feel safer? Of course you don't. Nobody does. And the reason nobody feels safer is Biden's response to the disaster in Afghanistan. Rather than pause and learn from it, maybe fire the people responsible for it, not simply the self-destructive withdrawal from Afghanistan, but also the pointless 20-year war there, rather than do any of that like a normal person would do, Biden immediately set off in another direction, provoking yet another conflict this one in Eastern Europe. And he provoked it. They lie about it, but it's true. The facts are out there, and it's very obvious.
Okay, we're covering a lot of ground already. So much ground that it stretches from Afghanistan to Ukraine, where Biden definitely started that whole war, said very authoritatively by Tucker Carlson. But I want to start by expressing empathy for the audience of Tucker Carlson, at the very least sarcastically, because think about what you're exposed to there. The most condescending newsman in the history of TV. Do you feel safer? No, you don't. No one does. He just tells you flat out exactly how to feel about this. About something that one would think, a Trump fan, a conservative would be glad that this guy wasn't around, not only to stop him from potentially masterminding further attacks that kill either service members or civilians, but even if you're just a fan of retribution, which I'm guessing many in his audience are, the guy was the guy who planned 9/11. So you would think it would be considered a good thing, but it's not. In the same way that Obama getting Osama bin Laden wasn't a good thing. Weird that Tucker Carlson didn't find any reason to think that either of those things were good, even though he acknowledges there, because he has to have it both ways, that the war was a waste of time. The war in Afghanistan, the 21 years or whatever it was that we were there, was a waste of time and we shouldn't have been there. But he shouldn't have pulled out. You get the trick that he's playing on his audience there? He wants to pretend that he's anti-war. He wants to pretend that he's anti-intervention, but he did not want us to pull out of Afghanistan. If it was up to Tucker Carlson, we would still be there. Our service members would still be at risk. We would still be spending the billions of dollars. It's a little bit of sleight of hand that would only work on a group of people that have been so mentally and emotionally beaten down by Tucker Carlson that they can't follow the weird gaps in logic there, Jessica. But whatever it is, we know this. The consistent position is that even if Biden did something that seems tailor-made to please a conservative audience, it's not good enough and he shouldn't have done it. And now we're talking about something else. We're talking about Ukraine or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny to me that they're so focused on the deep state and making everything that the Biden administration do seem like a very large conspiracy. The truly interesting conspiracies we can confirm with released CIA documents. If you really want to get into it and you want to talk about why maybe killing a leader of Al-Qaeda is not great for safety in the United States, why there might be some retaliation for us doing that, great, have that conversation. But instead he starts talking about Ukraine, which is extremely interesting. And there's this narrative that the United States instigated Putin's invasion of Ukraine, which is wild because the United States very clearly said we have some security intel that suggests this is going to happen. Why would that provoke Russia to invade Ukraine? There have been so many news articles that have been run throughout history with no basis saying Russia's going to do X, Y, and Z, and we have intelligence, suggesting they're going to do this. And this has been a tool of propaganda to evoke fear, and then it doesn't happen and Russia laughs at us. That's happened so many times. Russia did this because they were planning on doing this. That's very clear. And to make this about Ukraine, it's just the classic bait and switch and ignoring all of reality, all of the facts, all of the history. And his audience, I also agree with you that, we can empathize with them because if all you're doing is watching Tucker Carlson and this is the narrative you hear all of the time, he presents it in a logical way and his delivery is kind of convincing. And so, to get people off of Fox News is a huge mission and to get people to stop watching Tucker Carlson is a huge mission because what is the alternative, right? We are not teaching good critical thinking in American public schools. The solution is good education, but what about all of the people that have gone through the public education system and now they only trust Tucker Carlson because he tells you everyone else is lying to you? It's really tough.
And that everyone smart feels the exact same way that you do, which is coincidentally the way that Tucker Carlson feels. At any particular moment, it might change, but you were always right, even as it changes. It's very 1984. Yeah, and those are the critical thinking skills that theoretically people of age have watching him now. They're destroying the schools. So in a few decades, it's gonna be worse and worse and worse, which is fun. But there's so we don't watch too much Tucker Carlson on this show on a weekly basis, but even in the short clips that we use, he fits in so much insanity. Not only, as we already talked about, we never should have been in Afghanistan and we definitely should still be in Afghanistan, but also Biden's responsible for the invasion of Ukraine. Biden did that. It's on Biden. But what else does Tucker Carlson say day after day about that invasion? Who cares? It's fine that Russia's doing it. Nobody should care. It's totally cool. So what does it matter that Biden did it in that case? If it's a good thing, then who cares who was responsible for it? It's the same as COVID, that China definitely gave it to us and Biden made it worse. And also, it's nothing and you really shouldn't worry about it. Nobody's actually dying. In fact, the vaccine is worse, but China definitely gave it to everyone. Your brain will bleed watching some of this. In any event, he is not alone in his thoughts about how insignificant this is. James Inhofe, senator of Oklahoma, top Republican on the Senate Armed Services Committee, said the fact that the leader was in Afghanistan reflects the total failure of the Biden administration's policy toward that country. I mean, they got him. Okay, no, we're moving on. Okay. Michael McCall of Texas on the House Foreign Affairs Committee said the strike serves as a reminder the American people were lied to by President Biden. Al-Qaeda is not gone from Afghanistan as Biden falsely claimed a year ago. Yeah, but this isn't even my position, but Biden's position is we said we would still be able to function because we're American. We go literally wherever we want. We don't care about sovereign borders or anything. So maybe think about it a little bit. Anyway, I want to get to just a little bit more because they don't want this to stay in the news. They don't want this to be the focus because it is so clearly from their point of view a good thing for Biden. So here is what Tucker Carlson turned to, trying to ignore the Zawahiri news.
There are a lot of ways to pull out of Afghanistan. Biden chose a path that seemed designed to inflict maximum damage to the interests of the United States. He did that. Kind of no debating it, but Biden is not ashamed of it. He wasn't ashamed of it then, he's not ashamed of it now.
Okay, he's telling his audience that Joe Biden, for all of his faults, and Jessica and I could play a fun game of going back and forth naming them, and we would eventually pass out before we'd run out of things. But the idea that he looked at a spreadsheet of dozens of ways to pull out of Afghanistan and specifically chose the way designed to do the most damage to America is insane and perfectly in line with basically everything that Tucker Carlson says. That has become, I don't know if you watch any Tucker Carlson, that has become his go-to thing. That it is not that the Democrats are hurting America with the lockdowns or with their economic policy or with schooling or with the Green New Deal or whatever. They are only doing these things to destroy America. But bear in mind, they're also the swamp. They're the ruling elite. They're the ones who are in control of everything. They own everything, and they're trying to destroy everything to hurt the people who don't own anything. How exactly that would be good for the ruling elites is never made clear to his audience, but he repeatedly reiterates to them that every one of these choices, whether it's immigration or healthcare or energy or whatever, is purely and solely designed to damage America's interest in a way that's never actually defined.
Yeah. His theory is that if Biden wants to stay in power and wants to remain president, he can somehow convince his audience that that same man will do the thing that is most damaging to the United States. It just doesn't make sense. All of the logical fallacies that he puts forward are insane. They're absolutely insane. And he knows what he's doing. He's not completely unaware. He himself does not believe the logical fallacies that he puts forth because there are old interviews of him where he's criticizing right-wing newscasters and saying directly, these are people who are spewing populist rhetoric so that they can get views when they take a big check and go home and live a life that's completely disconnected from the everyday people they're trying to reach. He said that early in his career, and then he became that, and he's 100%. Tricking everyone with it. And so it feels like you said a waste of time to criticize Tucker Carlson, to call him names when he knows exactly what he's doing. And instead, I think spending most of our time countering that narrative with the facts is time well spent.
Yeah, and trying to peel off a few people who might not know that there's alternative sources of information. By the way, you made a great reference to that video early on. Everyone should definitely check out John Oliver's episode on Tucker Carlson. He does a great job in charting. Like Tucker Carlson said everything that he was going to do. He said exactly what his scheme was going to be, and then he did it. I want to read just one more graphic. And I want to apologize to the audience for making you try to make sense of this sort of thing. But again, we are a people who are driven by empathy. And I want you to feel a bit of empathy for his audience, who has to contend with paragraphs like this. I'm gonna jump ahead to graphic 9. Biden has been more pro-China than any president, and yet he seems to want a war with China. Now, this does not make any sense at all. In fact, it only makes sense if the Biden White House is intentionally trying to weaken and destroy the United States. I would like to add one other alternative. It only makes sense if you're an idiot trying to delude your audience. Like, they really want to have their, in this case, Chinese cake and eat it too. He's weirdly pro-China, in fact, maybe a commie. Also, he wants nuclear war with China. Now, this might not seem to make sense, but we'll be back after this. This is what his audience is up against on a daily basis, and they will accept it. They will accept that he is simultaneously way too favorable towards the communists in China and also wants China to nuke and kill everyone that Biden has ever known. It's fun, really fun. Good thing that he only has millions of viewers on a nightly basis.
Yeah,
anyway.
It's amazing how he can convince his audience. And the right does this every new Democratic administration, where suddenly every problem that was debated on the campaign trail, like you're inheriting this slew of problems, suddenly they're brand new. The moment Biden got in office, it was Biden has caused inflation, Biden is handling the COVID crisis terribly, vaccines. The vaccine, Trump was gonna call it the Trump vaccine, but suddenly when Biden came in office, it was tyranny that we were getting vaccines. Stimulus checks were suddenly something that was a terrible economic idea, but when we got them under Trump, it was thank you, Mr. Trump, for giving us our checks. Same thing with the rising power of China and the US-China challenge, where there's this idea that we have to compete with China instead of collaborate with China and address, I don't know, global issues like climate change, but they're terrified of globalism. But Biden inherited a tense relationship with China, and Biden hasn't really done much to prop up China. And so it's just crazy how they Tucker Carlson especially relies on just a short-term memory of his viewers. And it's really important. I think we do a good job of it on TVR and TYT to put the news in the context of what's happened before, because if you just talk about what's happening today, it doesn't make much sense, and it's really easy to spin that narrative. And that's really how Tucker Carlson is so successful.
Agreed, 100%. Okay, with that, we're gonna go to our first break. We come back though, lots to get into, including really fascinating statements by the daughters of one of the January 6th rioters. We'll have that and more for you after this. Donald Trump has a new endorsement to announce in the Missouri GOP primary for the US Senate. He is endorsing Eric. Which one? I don't know. Whichever Eric. No, seriously. There is a big election in the great state of Missouri, and we must send a MAGA champion, Trump says, and true warrior to the US Senate, someone who will fight for border security, election integrity, our military, and great veterans, together with having a powerful toughness on crime. And the border. We need a person who will not back down to the radical left lunatics, all capitalized, who are destroying our capital C country. I trust great people in Missouri on this one to make up their own minds, much as they did when they gave me landslide victories in the 2016-2020 elections. And I am therefore proud to announce that Eric has my complete and total endorsement. Well, look, here's the thing about endorsing Eric. There are multiple Erics he could be talking about. The only thing we know for sure is that he's not talking about his son. He is definitely not endorsing or supporting or sending any love to his son. But you've got Eric Schmidt, the state's sitting attorney general. You've got Eric Greitens, the state's former governor who resigned in disgrace. That was fun. He's the one who we played his ad a couple weeks ago where he was trying to hunt down and shoot rhinos, other Republican candidates. He's a cool guy. He doesn't say which he is supporting. And what would you do if you were one of the Erics in the Republican Party? Would you wait for clarification? Would you send out a tweet saying, seems weird that the former president doesn't seem to know what he's talking about? No, you just be happy about it. Eric Schmidt put out this tweet saying, I'm grateful for President Trump's endorsement. I would have put a question mark on the end of that because it's still an open question. So he said that. Eric Greitens says, honored to have the support of President Trump. We will MAGA. But it can't be both, right? It can't be both for it to mean anything. They're running against each other. Jessica, what do you think?
Hilarious that one of them was like, I don't like the Republican establishment. The other one was like, we're fighting the left's indoctrination. Very interesting. I think Trump's endorsements should be a finders, keepers, losers, weepers situation. I think that's fair. Whoever claims it first gets to have it. But I do think, perhaps Trump is a little bit smarter than we know. And he's shaken up by how his endorsements have been going. And his new strategy is now whoever wins, he will claim that was the rightful receiver of the endorsement.
It's probably a safe bet. I mean, it's not like a lot of the Trump fans afterward to be like, hey, he wasn't specific. That makes me question his judgment. I don't think anything like that is gonna happen. So it's probably safe on his part to just endorse everyone, literally everyone, because he is ruling over a party that is so pathetic. They are lizards crawling on their bellies through the muck for this guy. That's what they've been reduced to. I mean, when he unendorses people, they put out ads like desperately trying to get him back, or claiming that even though he doesn't endorse them, they're the ones who represent him most. In the case of Nancy Mace, she made the trek all the way up the coast to New York to appeal outside of his building, which there's no reason to believe he was even in. That even though she didn't have his endorsement, you should still love her most. All of this for a guy who lost the last election. We've never had this on the Democratic side, like this sort of fawning, like adulation, even for presidents who've recently won the presidency, let alone on the left. You would never debase yourself in this way to get Ilhan Omar to endorse you, even Bernie. Why are they like this? Take a look at this ad. This is what Eric Greitens put out. Again, it's not even clear that he's got the dude's endorsement.
Team, we just got President Trump's endorsement and we are honored to have it. He was very clear that he wants a MAGA champion. That's what I am. My opponent, Eric Schmidt, he's a rhino. President Trump was clear he wants a warrior. I'm a Navy SEAL. Eric Schmidt is a career politician. President Trump was also clear that he wants somebody who's gonna fight for America, for his values. That's what I've always done. By contrast, just last night, President Trump blasted Eric Schmidt for great dishonesty in politics. The choice in this election could not be clear. Let's get out and vote. Everybody, tomorrow, August 2nd, in the primary, Eric Greitens for the US Senate.
No, but the choice could be clearer for Trump. He apparently had a lot of trouble with the choice because he didn't choose. He didn't choose you. You can't just keep using the word clearly in your ad when there is nothing clear about this, except, as Jessica pointed out, potentially some growing political cowardice on the part of Donald Trump. Any other thoughts?
Most important part of this story is that they're both happy about it. You'd think this would be a situation where one of them would be like, oh, I think there was a mistake, just to be clear, like I don't have Trump's endorsement. That did not happen. They were both thrilled to have it. I think that's insane and hilarious that he's like, oh, it's very clear that I'm a MAGA champion and I'm this and I'm that. These two dudes are beefing without even directly mentioning, talking to one another, saying like, hey, this endorsement was mine. I know he didn't say a last name, but it was mine. But we know that's what's going on here. He's trying to paint the picture that this was definitely his and not the other guy's. It's kind of funny.
Kind of, in a very sad way.
Yes.
And look, later on tonight, one of them will win, and Trump will definitely say, I specifically chose him. That other guy sucked. I hated him. I always hated him. He's the worst. He'll definitely say that. By the way, we don't have the tweet, so I don't know who to give credit to for this. But earlier in the race, there was someone on Twitter who predicted that Trump should just endorse both the Erics, just endorse Eric. And he actually ended up doing that. It's as weird as what Twitter can come up with. That's what we've descended to. Okay, with that, we're gonna jump ahead to our next block. This is a fascinating one. Yet another one of the insurrectionists is now facing a significant time in prison. This is Guy Reffitt, was initially the first January 6th defendant found guilty by a jury. He attempted to storm the Capitol January 6th last year, armed with a gun and zip ties. I read that because you might watch Tucker Carlson, who keeps saying that nobody had a gun when in fact multiple guns were found. Anyway, he was stopped, and thankfully he didn't kidnap anyone, he didn't murder anyone. But he was found guilty, and he has just been sentenced to 7 years, found guilty on 5 different charges. Here's the interesting thing. Members of the family are often asked how they feel about this after a sentencing in this case. And his daughters had a lot to say, in part about him, but they had someone else that they wanted to focus a bit more on. Take a look at this.
To mark my dad as this horrible person, and then having him prosecuted like this when somebody is maybe even able to get elected again, doesn't seem right to me.
Trump deserves life in prison if my father's in prison for this long.
And I have to say, I think that they make a compelling point there, Jessica. He was one of the people who stormed the barricades looking to, I don't know, maybe kill Pence, maybe not. Maybe the gun and the zip ties were just for fun. It was part of the outfit, I don't know. But the person who clearly wanted this to happen, who got the people there, who sent them to the Capitol, is probably going to live free for the rest of his life. That certainly doesn't seem like justice.
Absolutely not. There's a reason that Tucker Carlson keeps saying not a single person at the January 6th insurrection, he will never call it that, but on January 6th carried a firearm to the event. The reason that they keep pushing this narrative is because to prove that this was an insurrection and not just seditious conspiracies, because they have to prove a significant amount of violence. And they really want to seem like this either wasn't a violent event and it was a bunch of patriots, or it was and it was Antifa. You can't have both. Again, Tucker Carlson pushing two narratives that just don't work together, can't exist in the same reality. But this person carrying zip ties is super interesting because every protest I've been to, the police are the ones with zip ties, which suggests he intended to detain people. Super scary. He had a clear plan, and Trump told them to go, right? The daughters are absolutely right. These people were following the orders of the president, and even the fact that it's taken the DOJ this long to begin the process of holding Trump accountable for what he's done here, which we know from the committee hearings that was pretty clearly an insurrection. It sucks that it's taken this long. Especially when he told them to go. And I feel for the daughters, it's pretty clear they don't like Donald Trump, which gives me hope for the next generation, right? A lot of folks who are friends with or family members of people who were there in January 6th feel pretty shameful about it. And a lot of them don't agree with what went down that day.
Yeah, and actually I want to play just a little bit more of the video because they wanted to make clear that just because their father might have done something, which he now says he regrets, that doesn't mean that they agree with him. Take a look at this.
He is the one. Edward Bernays, Aldous Huxley, that's where I get my beliefs from. And my parents raised us to be free thinkers and to have our own thought. They did not raise us to a one-pointed point of view.
Now, normally, especially online, when you see someone stressing how much of a free thinker they are, that means that they just believe whatever Alex Jones or Joe Rogan tells them. But in this case, they seem to want to make clear that although they probably would prefer that their father's not in prison and they definitely want real justice here, that doesn't mean that they agree ideologically with the insurrection, which if I were them, I too would probably want to make sure that people know.
I hope she's critically reading Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays is related to Sigmund Freud and is kind of the father of propaganda and aided the CIA in propagandizing, I don't know, the coup in Guatemala for one example. So hope she's reading that critically.
No, I would assume that's what she means, that she's studying propaganda. I assume that's what it means. Yes. Yeah, some of his quotes about the need to cow the populace with careful messaging and everything, I assume she's reading that critically. Anyway, with that said, we're gonna take a little break. We come back, we might be facing a constitutional convention, and the right is pretty excited about it. We'll tell you why after this.
State lawmakers in Denver, Colorado discussed a constitutional convention on Sunday, and this isn't speculative. This is really what they were up to. The event page directly stated that. It said the Academy of States is a collaborative effort of leading advocates who desire that our several state legislators would bring reform to our federal government through a convention authorized and empowered by Article 5 of the US Constitution. So how this would have to go down is 2/3 of the states in the United States must pass a convention call, and the decisions of the convention must be approved by 3/4 of state legislators. to become a part of the Constitution. And this isn't the first time members of the right are talking about a constitutional convention. In 2021, Rick Santorum acknowledged this was precisely how conservatives gain control of our country, and he wasn't too concerned with popular consensus. So what he said was, we have a hard time winning presidential elections. All of Democrats' votes are concentrated in a very small group of people in urban areas, and it's hard to draw legislative districts that they can win. Rural voters, even though there are fewer of them, actually have an outsized granted power under this process. And we have the opportunity as a result of that to have a supermajority, even though we may not even be in an absolute majority when it comes to the people who agree with us. So very clearly outlining here that having the majority doesn't matter too much. Democracy, actually, forget popular consensus. And they love to say, we're a republic, not a democracy. And he's really pointing out here, the intense gerrymandering of state legislators, and that Republicans are winning at gerrymandering. And so therefore, this is a huge advantage for conservatives. But it's actually not the only advantage conservatives would have in this scenario, because the population each state representative represents is different state by state. So in West Virginia, one state representative has 18,000 people in their district, and compare that to New York, where 135,000 people are represented by one person. So a huge outsized impact for these states that are not as populated as other states. So yeah, if you value any democracy at all, this is a really bad idea. And they've made some progress getting to that 34 state threshold. Let's take a look at this map that outlines the states that have actually passed a call to convene a constitutional convention. Some states have already passed this call. Others, it's in progress, like Colorado, where this convention was at. 9 have not made an attempt yet, and 16 have failed. Notably, if you add together all of the states where this attempt hasn't failed, that's 34. But also notably, they'd have to get California and Nevada, which is probably unlikely. But nevertheless, they're playing the long game and they're making progress with this. And I have said before, our Constitution needs some work. A constitutional convention wouldn't be a terribly bad thing. But if we consider what the Constitution we have now dictates in Article 5 and how much this would rely on state legislators who overwhelmingly represent conservatives who are not the popular party, it doesn't bode well for democracy if we were to follow this process for calling a constitutional convention.
Yeah, I mean, look, this has always been the danger because, of course, constitutional conventions are not, you can't start one for X topic. It's just when you start it, it's open, and what happens, happens. That's something that Wolfpack, the call to get money out of politics has had to contend with. But we do have to bear in mind that there would going in be this potential advantage. What I love about this story the most is just that they finally acknowledge it. Like, we know that people don't agree with them, and we know that they don't care because they don't actually value democracy in its own right. Democracy is fine and acceptable if it produces conservative white Christian rule. As soon as that stops being the case, they don't care. Whereas we actually want it for its own sake. We believe it produces a better world, and we believe that it is the right of all people to have their voices be heard. For them to just admit that they know people don't agree with them, they know that they're not going to be able to win these national elections fairly. To be fair, they did lie a little bit, pretending like they have not become adept at carving up districts that magnify their political power just because people are in urban areas. No, they've been quite talented at that over the past few years. I would just throw out there, like, what if, and this is crazy, what if you were to try to appeal to those people in the urban areas or wherever outside of rural America? What if you were to try to get people to want to vote for you? Wouldn't that be an amazing strategy? Now, it's the same thing we keep shouting at the Democrats constantly, but imagine if people actually cared to represent people, to either persuade them or maybe to listen to them and then do what it is that they want. But that is so far outside of this process. No, Rick Santorum is just interested in making America one gigantic cathedral, basically. And he's gonna use whatever techniques, whatever tactics are necessary to get it done.
Right, states' rights is just like the convenient argument to make right now. They don't actually believe states having, power to make decisions and pushing this back to the states is a good form of government, right? They're not saying federal government is, tyranny and we need to push it back to the states so that we have more diffuse power. They're not making that argument. They're just saying states' rights right now because it's more convenient than saying we actually don't believe women should have a right to an abortion and people who can get pregnant should have a right to an abortion, because their whole strategy here is to just write a new constitution. So that would make certain things federal law. And if we think about this being in the hands of state legislators, we covered a story on the main show yesterday in West Virginia, where there was a West Virginia lawmaker saying we should get rid of child support. And it prompted me to look into, what proportion of state legislators in West Virginia are men, and it's 87%. So we can just imagine the kind of things they would put in this constitution. But this effort exactly proves that conservatives don't care at all about states' rights. They only care about making their agenda of, white Christian nationalism and patriarchy law of the land.
Yeah, it is convenient. If you don't want something to be controlled by a federal government where you think it won't go your way, then say that it's about states' rights. And then as soon as you manipulate the system enough, you take advantage of the way that the system is set up to gain control over it, then you just take away the states' rights to argue on it. Like they want to make it federally illegal. It's so obvious, and it seems to be having an effect. People seem to get that. I think that's why the polls have been turning against them recently. But let's bear in mind, as we always said, the polls turning against them, it having an effect on the midterms, that is a consequence. That's a ripple. They got the thing that they wanted, which was getting rid of Roe v. Wade. So until we get that back, we haven't won just because the polls look better for the Dems or they maintain their control over the Senate. That's a good consequence, I suppose. But the Republicans are still winning, again, by manipulating the system in a variety of different ways.
Yeah. And what's weird about this is they said everyone's invited. Like, this isn't just Republicans, it's not just conservatives. Anyone can go. I think if you're a Democratic representative in one of these states that's holding one of these meetings where they're strategizing, not only to get to the point where they actually convene the Constitutional Convention, but also they're strategizing to reinforce their views once they're there. This really isn't the type of meeting that's open to everyone if they're talking strategy like that. But I do think if something like this is happening and they're saying this isn't, exclusively a Republican meeting, Democratic state legislators should go as well.
Yeah, no, that's not a bad point. With that, we are unfortunately running a bit low on time. I'm gonna read just a couple quick comments to close out this first hour. Carmina the Singing Dragon sent in a super chat to say, let's not forget that Josh Hawley said abortion rights could make a country-wide gerrymander and Republicans will hold the electoral votes forever. Such a weird strategy, such a weird misread of our population. Although bear in mind, Kansas is voting effectively to remove the constitutional guarantee to reproductive rights. That's one of the things we're gonna be tracking on tonight's election coverage. Let's see, how much time do we have? About 30 seconds or so? Okay, Flip the Twisted Dragon says, here comes Gilead, right down Pennsylvania Lane. Either way we fought or say goodnight and kiss freedom bye again. Oh geez. Okay, with that, if you're on the podcast with linear platforms, thank you so much for watching. On our other platforms though, Jessica and I have quite a bit more to talk about. So we're gonna take just a couple-minute break, but don't go anywhere because we'll be right back after this. Kobe Green has been a member for 2 months, says still with the election lies. It's been like 2 years. Trump can't cope with an L and he is taking it out on us. I hate it here, 100%. By the way, in terms of being able to hold two seemingly mutually exclusive thoughts in your mind at the same time, I remember an interview, I don't remember if it was the Good Liars, but they were talking to a woman who was saying, as many on the Q side believe, that Biden is not actually president. He is a figurehead, maybe a clone, maybe a robot, maybe a lizard or an alien, or all of those. Trump is actually president. Biden is just there for some reason. But she still does believe that all the bad news is Biden's fault. Even though Biden is not a real person and is not in charge, Trump is in charge. Biden's responsible for inflation and high gas prices. Isn't that amazing? These people, we don't give them the credit for the mental dexterity that they demonstrate. Dead in the Scene has been with us for 8 months on Twitch, says, just wanted to say that I watch you all daily while I work, makes my day seem a little more sane. Thanks for helping me to not have a daily mental breakdown. Thanks, we try. It's our contribution and the only one that I can make.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.